So yesterday I did a video making the point that I didn't necessarily believe that the coronavirus was man-made. Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo came out making a statement basically saying there's enormous amount of evidence that this came from a lab in China. Now, I've said before that I don't trust a word that comes out of either one of their mouths, and so that in no way changes my particular point of view on this virus being natural transmission. That said, I don't know that as an absolute fact. I'm not necessarily a scientist, and even though other scientists are epidemiologists are making the point that it's natural, the incentive for them is not necessarily to leap to the conclusion that it's man-made, so that necessarily wouldn't be their original and default perspective. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not. We work with all sorts of viruses all across the world in multiple labs that have the level of security that would allow them to deal with some of the worst pathogens that we have on this planet, often to weaponize and often to try to create vaccines, meaning if you can create a vaccine for yourself, you can use this as a weapon to attack other populations. Regardless of what they say in regards to the reason of their research, part of that research does deal with that. We brought on Dr. Daddy Cherie to talk about man-made pathogens and why there's science, or why people, or some people, take the hypothesis that this was a virus that was created, not necessarily just transmitted naturally. So that interview got interrupted partially yesterday, but that was a terrifying interview. So I'm going to bring this over to Dr. Daddy Cherie from the interview we had yesterday, and I'm going to play that just so you guys can hear that point of view. Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schley-Hubert. All of us are bunkered down. But give us a like or share if you're digging this content. So we have a really interesting video, or a really interesting segment coming up. I might have to eat my words on a video that I did yesterday. Well, I made the point that Trump and Pompeo came out with a bombshell announcement over the weekend that COVID-19 virus was man-made and somehow escaped a Chinese lab. Now, my point was these guys are flagrant liars, and there's no point to believe a flagrant liar. However, I may be wrong on that. There may be something actually to that. Now, this is a significant escalation in rhetoric of the Trump administration, regardless of whether they're true or false. Let's hear Trump blaming the Chinese lab on this when he was being asked questions about it.
And my question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
And what gives you a high degree of confidence that this originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
I can't tell you that. I'm not allowed to tell you that.
Do you think that withholding information about the virus is related to them trying to undermine your reelection?
I don't want to put any cast any dispersions. I just will tell you that China would like to see sleepy Joe Biden. They would take this country for a ride like you've never seen before.
Are you insinuating they intentionally let it spread?
Well, they could have done it, and I'm just saying. Well, one of two things happened. They either didn't do it, and they couldn't do it from a competent standpoint, or they let it spread.
That's an astonishing statement. And if you notice, he added politics in that by bringing Joe Biden into the mix. This is my skepticism of this, because it's become a political football to some degree. U.S. intelligence has issued a formal statement noting that the scientific consensus was that the virus was not man-made or genetically modified. On Tuesday, Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, said that the weight of evidence pointed to a natural transmission but was not conclusive. Also, most epidemiologists conclude that while it's possible this came from a lab in Wuhan, it's far less likely scenario than the natural transmission with mutations along the way that allowed the infections to invade humans. Now, that said, it's certainly not conclusive that the origins of the transmission was a natural occurrence. There are scientists that have taken the position that the virus wasn't of natural origin. Even the comments above by the government's own experts can't rule out man-made intervention in the creation and propagation of this virus. Now, again, I don't necessarily believe a word up Pompeo's mouth, but I do believe a guess that is coming on today. So to discuss, we're joined by guest Dr. Daddy Cherie, a microbiologist, associate professor of biology, co-editor-in-chief of News Junkie Post, and author of We Have Dared to Be Free. Dr. Cherie, welcome to the show.
Hello, Jamal and Bob. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you came on. I mean, this has been an issue that has been ravaging the United States. We have over 1 million people infected. I think there's almost 70,000 people that have died. The numbers have been going up over the last few weeks at the same time that these guys have been opening up the government. And the Trump administration, for political reasons, I would say, at least in the beginning, and even Biden, has started to blame China. But the rhetoric from Trump has escalated, making the point that China might have released this from a lab, either intentionally or accidentally, but basically it was created by a person. Now, I read your paper, and your paper was extremely in-depth. And I read that thinking to myself, wow, this is a fascinating topic, and you may be able to open my mind on this and bring me around to your point of view. So in very basic terms so the audience can understand it, why do they believe, or what is the evidence that this became somewhat of a man-made virus as opposed to a virus that was created through natural transmission?
Okay, before I tell you why I believe that this was a man-made virus, and really this is a conclusion I came to by going through the scientific literature, the way that I would review papers for my own use. And then really studying them, studying every bit of data. Okay. Before I go on, the thing that
Now, she's going to go into why she believes this is a man-made virus. And as she goes into why she believes this is a man-made virus, she has a paper out that is extremely
that
detailed.
is not the only place to be blamed for this. I think the Wuhan Institute of Virology was almost certainly involved in the SARS-CoV-2 research. But the Wuhan Institute of Technology was actually built with French help for $42.4 million.
I don't know what's happening. One second.
It was designed by...
There we are. All right, so I'm trying to get the right video. All right, so this is the next video in line where she goes into the science of this.
That is not the only place to be blamed for this. I think the Wuhan Institute of Virology was almost certainly involved in the SARS-CoV-2 research. But the Wuhan Institute of Technology was actually built with French help for $42.4 million. It was designed by French architects, okay, and particularly the BSL lab, okay, the super high-level security research lab, okay, biosafety level 4 lab, all right? Now, from the start, the Chinese have been extremely collaborative and have had a whole bunch of international partners, okay? And I will just list the countries that have been involved, where scientists have cycled through those labs. That includes, of course, France, not only France, but also the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, Japan, Singapore, Pakistan, Islamabad, and Kenya. And you can find all this on the website of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, okay? And they list as their partners also the European Union, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the WHO, and an organization of USAID that's called the EPT Predict Eco Health Alliance. What this organization does is it finances people to go and find very, very nasty pathogens in animals and in humans and bring them to biosafety level 4 labs for research.
And those labs are few and far between. Meaning, Dr. Cherie, those labs are few and far between, right?
Labs, there are very few of them. There's only about 30 in the whole world. Okay, and there are ones in Australia, in the U.S., in France, and so on.
But your point is they bring them to those labs because there's so few of those labs, meaning other countries. I think your basic point is you can't necessarily entirely blame China for something that all of these nations were basically using this lab for.
They were using this lab, yes. But even the people who have their own BSL-4 labs, they cycle back and forth through that lab. They educate each other's students. They're all incredibly chummy, and nobody, of course, can really verify their research. No legitimate scientist can really verify their research unless they also have access to a BSL-4 lab and want to take those kinds of risks.
So why do you think, what's the very specific thing within the context of the research where you look at and you say, yeah, there's no way this can be a natural transmission. This has to be man-made. There's something about the structure of the virus or something about the way that the COVID-19 is organized. Can you explain that?
Okay, the COVID-19 virus has got about 16 proteins, okay, but there's one protein that scientists have absolutely focused on, and that's the spike protein. You see the picture of the virus, it's got this thing sticking out on the top of it. That's the spike protein. And the spike protein is what recognizes protein on the surface of human cells so that the virus can enter cells. So for obvious reasons, the research has focused on the spike protein. Problem is, if you look at SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, its closest relative is actually SARS-CoV, the virus from 2002. Okay? But the Chinese have come up with a virus from a bat that they're calling RAG-13, that they supposedly discovered in 2013. But they never made the sequence available until January of this year. And they said, no, that virus is actually the closest relative of SARS-CoV-2. The only problem with that is that the main resemblance between that virus and SARS-CoV-2 is in the spike protein. Okay, but there's a whole lot more to the virus. So the analogy I make about this would be like, you wanted to compare something to humans, and then you pull this chimpanzee out of a hat that has a human head. I mean, it's incredibly improbable evolutionarily, all right? Now, the problem with the SARS-CoV-2 virus is that it has a spike protein. The spike protein is about 1,280 residues. Imagine the residues as if there were beads on a chain. You have 1,280 of these, okay? And let's say that these are like 20 different shades of green, all right? Problem is, there are 4 clusters of residues that are red. They are not from coronavirus, they're from HIV, okay? And imagine that there are 20 different shades of red to pick from, all right? So to find a sequence of reds of different shades, for example, that's 6 to 8 residues long, that is identical to a sequence in HIV is highly improbable, okay? The probability of this is about 8 in 10 billion. But there are 4 such sequences in SARS-CoV-2, all right? So that's 8 in 10 billion to the 4th, all right? So it's 0, all right?
So this is most likely what Trump is looking at when he's saying the scientists are looking at this and saying there is no way that there's enormous evidence that this is man-made, because basically it's the way it's put together is just entirely bizarre. And it's not something that a natural transmission would create if it was coming from, let's say, a bat and then some kind of intermediary source and then jump into human beings. It's not put together in those terms.
No, yeah, there's such a thing as recombination. We talk about et cetera. But first of all, recombination between SARS and HIV is extremely improbable. And then there is no recombination we know of where the viruses could exchange such tiny little bits. Okay, so this is basically impossible. All right, but what they did was, when somebody tried to publish that information, they just jumped all over him and they killed it, and they made them withdraw the paper, because the people in Wuhan now they sit on the editorial boards of 6 different scientific journals, and they are incredibly powerful scientifically. They give money to scientists all over the world and so on. And so even though the paper was pulled, what happened is that Luc Montagnier, the Nobel laureate who actually discovered hardcore HIV in vitro, decided that no, he wasn't going to allow this to happen. He went public and he started saying, no, this thing has got HIV sequences in it, and this is not likely to happen. And it's actually when I heard him say that I went, and I did not just take his word for it. I went and I actually read the papers, okay, and convinced myself, yes, that is the case.
Dr. Cherie, let me ask you real quick, because I do think this link then is important to understand. Then how does the virus that's in the lab get out into the general populace? And I think the one thing that's important is that the initial efforts to trace the virus back to the fish market, they were able to find maybe a half of the people or some amount of the people that were at the fish market, but they weren't able to link the rest of the folks to that specific market. And so there is still the question of where did it originate from? I appreciate in your article talking about how you don't believe necessarily in conspiracy theories or a bunch of folks that are like planning this to like kill people on a scale that we're seeing right now. But how does it go from the lab into the community?
Well, there's I don't know if this is true, but in one article that came out in the Australian news, they say that there's a scientist in the Wuhan lab that has disappeared. Okay, the name of the scientist has been scrubbed from everything, and nobody's seen that scientist in quite a while. So this is just conjecture. So the rumor is that scientist might have been patient zero, and might have actually just accidents happen. You see, you have all these crazy labs all over the place, but first of all, people make mistakes. There's a lab like that in Galveston. There are hurricanes. There are earthquakes. These labs are extremely dangerous. And it has happened, that somebody thought they had killed the virus, and then they were transferring the killed virus from a BSL-4 lab to a different facility, and it turned out the virus wasn't killed, and it contaminated them and started contaminating a bunch of people. Mistakes happen. The virus got out because somebody screwed up. And I think China has been trying to cover up ever since. And I suspect China's European and other Western partners have actually helped this process. It's not just China. It happened in China.
Wait, you mean help the process? What do you mean? Help them cover it?
Have actually helped the cover up. Yes, I think so.
But at this point, the Trump administration is blaming China directly. I mean, do you think the change in rhetoric has to do for political reasons? Like, I guess I'm getting into China when it first came out. I guess it's hard for me to know the difference between where politics stop and where reality begins because they lie so much. And so when it comes down to Trump and Pompeo kind of making this case, my first thought is, okay, these guys are probably lying for political reasons. By the same token, it's possible that there's an actual reality behind that virus getting out from that particular lab with all of these other countries and everything else helping create those viruses and kind of help with the laboratory and the conditions for it. That's a terrifying reality, though. I mean, when they're looking for a vaccine for this virus, how is a vaccine created if the virus is that mutated? Meaning if the virus is something that was created, man-made, and it wasn't something that was a natural occurrence, would it be that much more difficult to make a virus that has HIV associations associated with it? Like, I guess I don't understand the science in trying to vaccinate people for something that was potentially created by human beings.
So one thing that they suggested is that somebody very stupidly put HIV sequences on this virus so that they could see if they could raise a vaccine, if they could use it to raise a vaccine. In other words, you could infect monkeys or mice or something and see if they can make antibodies, if they can have immunity against HIV. Well, that was a really stupid thing to do because if you put HIV sequences on this virus, then that means you're giving this virus the ability to get into, potentially to get into human CD4 lymphocytes, which are actually the very cells that are needed to raise immunity when you are getting infected by a pathogen. So what they had created was something potentially extremely dangerous. I think the virus did not work in that way, and it was just by chance that it didn't work that way, because if it had, we would, instead of cases, we would have had deaths. We would have had millions of deaths, okay, instead of hundreds of thousands.
Dr. Cherie, that's
because then would have invaded immune cells.
This was a great conversation with her. And I appreciated her coming on, especially after I did the video with Trump and Pompeo and saying these guys were flagrant liars. Trump and Pompeo are flagrant liars. That doesn't necessarily mean that this virus originated in a man-made way. I'm going to end this here. I didn't want to keep this one long. I just wanted to show the video that we did yesterday because this video was broken up during the live stream. You guys will see me today, 12 to 2. You may even see me before 12 to 2 if another story comes up between now and then. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.